Thank you for listening to 3 Legacies Recovery Recordings. If you enjoy our program, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to share with a friend. We're also self-supporting, so feel free to contribute to the channel through Venmo at Recovery Recordings 615. Please note that the views expressed on this podcast are solely our individual views and do not represent any official stance of any 12-step program. We are not affiliated with any specific recovery organization, and this content should not be considered as professional advice for alcoholism or addiction.
Hello everyone, thanks for tuning in. I'm your host, Paul H. This is 3 Legacies Recovery Recording Podcast. Today is January 3rd, 2025, and this is episode number 3. We'd love to hear from anyone out there that's listening. Please, you could comment, feel free to leave comments on the link on this YouTube. Also, at the same time, we have a email. We'd love to hear any kind of suggestions. If y'all have any talks y'all'd like to send in, possible guests on the show, we'd love to hear from y'all. That email address is recoveryrecordings615@yahoo.com. Tonight we have a special guest. I'm excited about tonight's guest. We have Bill C from Torrance, California. How you doing, Bill?
I'm okay so far.
Yeah. Happy New Year's. Yeah.
Happy New Year.
Yeah, it's great. What's your sober day? I meant to ask you that. What is it?
March the 27th, 1985.
March 27th. Wow. Okay. Cool. I'm super stoked about tonight, man. I got to meet you a couple times in the last couple of years. The first time me and Tom Yu was in Nashville. I'd met up with him. I just met Tom like previously, probably like 2 or 3 months before this, and Tom was one of my AA heroes. And I got to do a 5th step with him, and at the end of the 5th step, when we wrapped it up, he was like, "Hey man, you want to come join me?" We went to page 112 over in Nashville, and I got to meet you then. You was in town for a men's retreat. I loved it. The second time was at the Appalachian Regional Roundup. I think it was this in 2024, I believe it was, right? Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah, and it was great. Yeah, actually, the topic you had there was the 5 pillars of spirituality. That's what we're doing today. Yeah, we're going to talk on this. Yeah, man, how's everything in California?
It's been cold. When it gets down to 50 degrees here, people start dying.
Yeah. Well, it's crazy, man, because here I'm in the Nashville area, and it's been. Last week it was 50 here, but when it's 50 here this time of year, we're thanking God for it. Yeah, today it was like roughly 38 or 39. Yeah. And the windy. Yeah. All right, man. Let's. I guess I'm gonna get started just by asking you a few questions. Let's talk about like what it was that brought you in. Like, what did the last year of your drinking look like?
Well, I was 37 years old. I was married, my second marriage, and I had 2 kids, the second set of 2 children. My daughter was 3 years old, and my son was born on Christmas Day, 1984.
Wow.
This year he turned 40. Wow. I can't believe it. And so I was married, and I had these 2 kids, and I was just a mess. I was a lot sicker than I thought I was, as it turned out. I had very bad cirrhosis, and I had hepatitis C, and back then they didn't call it that. They called it non-A, non-B, and they said it wasn't any big deal. Well, they were wrong about that.
Wow.
And I was grossly overweight. I was well over 300 pounds, just bloated, and I was very sick. And so that last year of my drinking is like the last year of most everybody's drinking. It's just kind of pathetic and repetitive. And I think a lot of us, and this certainly is my case, we just fall over from the sheer exhaustion of the lifestyle. I mean, it's just rough. It's hard being an alcoholic. And we talk about how it stopped working. Well, what we really mean by that, I think, is that there's no more mental and emotional relief. I mean, it'll kill the physical pain. You can just get blotto, you don't feel anything. The other thing about the last year, I think, for most anybody, is the party stopped a long time ago. It's not a party anymore. There's no more good times. We're not out having fun and doing stuff. I'm an extrovert. I was always a bar drinker, and even us extroverts, we end up alone. We're not really fun to be around, and people write us off, and I'm sitting in my house just drinking.
Yeah, same here.
And so that last year was really rough. And what happened to me is that I called my mother, like any good gangster.
Yeah.
And my dad got sober in 1954 when I was 6 years old.
Wow.
So I was really raised in AA. They took me to meetings, and we had one of those houses where there was always the weird uncles around and stuff. My dad got sober.
That's awesome.
And so my mother, by that time, had been in Al-Anon for 30 years. And like I jokingly like to see, they're organized, prepared, and focused, and she got there inside of a half an hour and loaded me up and took me to a recovery place.
Wow.
I spent a month in a recovery place and then came out and went to AA. So that last year, without going into detail, because the sober story is much more interesting than the drunken one.
Yeah.
And I was just done, evidently. So far, so far so good. I was just done. And I had no, there wasn't any kind of a spiritual experience or anything. I just was tired. I was exhausted. And I made that phone call, and she came and got me and took me to a place. I spent 35 days in there. And the day I got out, I went to an AA meeting, and I've been sober ever since.
Wow. 1985, you said.
8 years ago, at 30 years sober, I had a liver transplant.
Wow.
So if I hadn't have got sober in 85 and got healthy, and I would have been dead a long time ago. And that's not an exaggeration. As it turns out, I was a lot more sick than I thought I was.
Wow. Yeah. It's interesting how you talked about how the mental and the emotional relief was really no longer there for it. It's funny because I'd always, when I hear that statement about how it would stop working for me, there was still a side of me that was like, I don't know, it worked pretty good for me, but it wasn't like it was when I first started. So that's interesting. I like the way you put that.
Well, have you ever drank yourself clear?
Yeah.
Where you just like you're not going away.
Yeah, it's miserable.
I don't know what it looks like from the outside, but I can remember drinking and you're still there.
Yeah.
Because I'm looking for oblivion and it's not happening.
True.
So in that sense, that's what I describe it as. The mental and emotional relief kind of goes away, but
Absolutely.
It would kill the physical pain that I had. I could just numb myself. Yeah. But it was, the party was long gone.
Yeah. It's funny, when I think back too, for me, and my experience was pretty much the same, but I didn't know that when it was going on. Like at the time, like it wasn't until I came in and I got cleared up, my mind started getting cleared up, and it was like, we're all like, holy crap, this was actually going on. But in the midst of it, it was like at like almost like a caveman level, like, drink, and it was all I did was just think about drinking and other things to change my state, Yeah, that's interesting. So what about, like, let me ask you, like, was it legal trouble? Like, was you in any kind of legal trouble? What was it? You just got tired of it, huh?
No, I mean, I spent some time in jail, but nothing, just for drunk and stupid, but I didn't have, nobody was chasing me. Nobody was after me. It wasn't like that. I've seen guys come in on court cards and stuff like that, and, they get busted, and that's the real wake up for them. They end up in jail and stuff, Well,
yeah.
Shit, I was in jail in the 1960s and the 1970s, and, just for stupid shit, just drunk and stupid. And that never stopped me. I had a business to run, and I wasn't doing a very good job of it, but I had that. I didn't have, I had some financial problems, but nothing major. It wasn't, I just was done.
Yeah.
That's the only way I can describe it.
Yeah.
It's like when I made that phone call, what happened specifically is, there's certain spiritual truths. And one of them is alcohol plus money equals cocaine. And that's not an outside issue.
Yeah.
It's an inside issue.
Yeah, it's true.
It's an aspect of my alcoholism, And so I was up all night.
Yeah.
And the only way you can do that is you need some stimulants. You need something to, so I'm doing that, and I'm up all night again, like one more time. And I don't know about you, but there's very few things that are more depressing as when that sun comes up.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's going to be another miserable day and a long line of miserable days, and you've been up all night. You're not going to be able to show up to where you're supposed to be. You're not going to make it.
Yeah.
It's just depressing.
Amen. Yeah.
And I was up all night in my living room. The wife was sound asleep in bed. The kids were in bed. And her and I, she didn't really want anything to do with me, and she didn't have the kind of family that could take her in, so she was just still there, but there was no real relationship. And my young daughter, the 3-year-old, got up, and she came out in the living room, and she was happy to see that Daddy was up.
Wow.
And she crawled up in my lap, and it just broke my heart.
Wow.
And there's those moments, I think, where you realize that, I'm not a father, I'm not a husband, I'm not a son, I'm a nothing. And I think that was the real trigger, I was all morose about the sun, and she gets up and crawls up in my lap. And it's hindsight. I don't know what I was really feeling. I was really hammered.
Yeah.
And I picked up the phone and I called my mother. And she came over right away and loaded me up in the car and took me to a place. She had connections, and she knew this place. It was a place called Starting Point in Costa Mesa. And they checked me in.
Wow.
She covered the cost, wrote them out a check, and I went in. And at that time, I remember this, being in there, and they put me in bed. They gave me some medication of some sort. And I laid down in this bed in the detox facility, and I was just really glad I was there. I was so exhausted. I was just tired. And, I woke up the next morning, and I was just kind of glad I was there.
Wow.
I needed, I spent some time in mental institutions, a couple of times. And, every once in a while, you just need a break. You need to go be put away somewhere, and not worry about anything. And I was glad I was there.
That's awesome. Yeah. You just touched on a valuable point for, the desperation part, just that at the end, like, holy crap, man. Like, there's I don't really know what word I'm looking for.
I can't hear you very well, and I got my volume on my phone turned up all the way.
Okay, can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Is that better?
That's better.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, you touched on a valuable point, the whole desperation, it's like, man, like, it's funny, like when you're working with a newer guy, when they come in, they're the ones that are real desperate, like you see how important that is, as someone that's been around for a minute, but they don't see that, it's just like an uncomfortable state that they're in, that they don't understand how important that position is,
I got a guy that I'm trying to sponsor right now that told me that he says he's been coming in and out of AA for 20 years.
Yeah.
And he told me, he says, I've always been a nice guy. I really don't have the self-hatred that people talk about.
Yeah.
And I told him, I said, you need to work on hating yourself more, man,
Yeah.
I don't know. You're the first guy I've ever talked to that came into AA saying, I think I'm okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think this is going to work. He laughed. I laughed. And I keep texting him.
That's
self-hatred.
Yeah.
Work on the self-hatred.
Yeah. Yeah, my first sponsor used to say, you better start having some problems or we're going to have some issues. Yeah, it's so true, yeah. Let's talk about this. So, all right, so when you got out, what was your relationship like? What was your background like with like any kind of relationship with God? What did that look like at the time when you got out of treatment?
Well, I think on page 52, I believe it is, the bedevilments, where it asks the question, are you having trouble with personal relationships? Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm big. I'm 6'5", and I'm loud and I'm aggressive, and especially back then. I mean, one of the ways that you cover up low self-esteem is by being loud and aggressive and a lot of bluster and bravado and all that stuff, and so I wasn't a nice guy. I wasn't real friendly.
Yeah.
And over time, that wears down to where there's pretty much no one left. There was pretty much nobody left in my life, really. I mean, I had a little business, so people had to work for me, but my wife was looking for a place to move to. She told me later, to get away from me. I was whoring around. I was cheating. I've always cheated on everybody I've ever been with. So I wasn't a nice guy. And you kind of know that about yourself, I mean, it's just like, I heard a guy in AA one time say, I always knew I was a nice guy, and now I am, after he got sober, and I did the same thing. I didn't think of myself that way, but I had trouble with lots of relationships. I didn't get along. I hated my father. You gotta hate your dad. It's a requirement for being an AA.
Yeah.
And guys tell me they love their parents. I go, come on now.
Yeah.
They're the first ones that interrupt the fun, right?
Amen.
So my life was just turmoil, and I remember clearly getting sober. When I got out of that place, I was sober for 35 days, right? And that's the first time I had 35 days sober, I think, since I was 15 years old or 16, something like that. I mean, that's a shock to the system.
Yep.
And so when I got out, everywhere I went, I was uncomfortable. They took away my medication, Now, I had lost the craving right away. The craving went away, and that's a gift, Some people struggle with it for a while, and with me, I was certainly uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I was unmedicated. My social skills were limited. I'm in AA and I didn't know anybody I didn't feel part of because I wasn't.
Yeah.
So it was a very uncomfortable period of time. And my dad used to say that his first year sober was the most remarkable year of his life. And I would probably say that's probably true, because it's such a life-changing experience.
Yeah.
He got sober at the same age, 37. Matter of fact, his sobriety date is March the 28th. Mine was March the 27th.
Wow.
We gave each other birthday cakes for the last 15 years of his life.
Wow. That's awesome.
In the men's stag. But at the time, that initial reaction, being in AA, I'm uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I'm emotionally immature, and I'm just uncomfortable. Now, that first year, by the time of the end of that first year, I had gotten a sponsor. I worked some steps. I did an inventory at 6 months sober. At the end of that year, I'm making amends, and at the end of that year, I'm starting to sponsor guys, and my life changed dramatically. Was it all perfect? No.
Yeah.
It's not, but pretty soon, I'm comfortable in AA now. Matter of fact, that's the only place I feel comfortable.
Yeah.
I'm making some friends, and I'm with people, and I'm clawing my way up the AA corporate ladder. I'm that kind of thing. So, but that first year is pretty stunning. But there was a lot of conflict in my life, at that time.
Yeah. Well, you just brought up. I like how you said that was the only place you felt comfortable. Yeah, that's my experience as well. And it took a while for really that to start, subsiding. It was like, it was a lot of meetings and stuff in the beginning, And also, I've heard you talk on some of your other talks about how alcoholism, it's really just about growing up. It's like just getting emotionally mature, right? You mentioned how you don't really think there's alcoholic thinking, right? But it's really just about getting emotionally mature. That's my experience. That's what it seems like.
Well, I think that, I've been sober a long time, and so you sponsor a lot of guys, you work with a lot of guys, and then you start forming opinions about what's really going on,
Yeah.
And I really think that we would like to think that we have some unique neurotic way of thinking.
Yeah.
I don't think we're much different than anybody else.
I agree.
The thing that makes us different is when we start drinking, we can't stop. Everything just turns to shit, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And you can see the cycle of addiction in AA. Some guy gets sober and he starts eating and he blows up to 400 pounds, you know?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, or guys that like, they start running and they can't stop running, even when they ruin their knees and their hips, you know? You can see that obsessive, compulsive kind of thing.
Yeah.
I started riding bicycles, you know? And I'm like riding bicycles no matter what, you know, it's like you start golfing till you puke, you know, it's that. So there is that kind of obsessive compulsive thing that you can see.
Yeah.
But I think our primary problem is, and this has been my personal experience and with a lot of other people, is that really what we are is emotionally immature.
Amen. Because
most of us started drinking in our teen years. Not everybody. Some people are more immature than others, you know, I mean. You know, you can. There's some people come to AA, they have virtually no social skills whatsoever. You know, they've been sleeping in cars most of their life.
Yeah.
There's that kind of an alcoholic.
Yeah.
But most of us, I think we're growing up now, and the chances of us doing that and looking good is really slim. And the only way you grow up, if you've anybody's raised children, is through experience. You have experiences that you learn from.
Yeah.
You learn what works and what doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
And you and I, most of the people I know in AA, we drank through all that. Yeah. We missed a lot of the experience. Mm-hmm. So we come into AA in our 30, 35, mid-30s maybe, even 20s, and I had the emotional development of a rather disturbed 16-year-old. You know, I mean, it's just like, you know, one of the stories I tell, and this is a true story, it's funny as hell. I think it's funny because everybody identifies with it. It's only funny in AA. I was 8 years sober, and I got escorted off of a soccer field full of 9-year-olds, which included my son, and my daughter, one of the two of them, for going after the referee. And I'm like 8 years sober, you know. I'm a step guy, and I'm sponsoring guys. I'm speaking around now. I'm not a newcomer.
Yeah.
I'm 8 years sober. Yeah. And when you're escorted off the soccer field, you know you fucked up. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And you know you screwed up again. Yeah. This is not the first time. Yeah. And you know when they're escorting, you're going to have to turn around at some point and go back and make amends for that behavior. Yeah. You know, but I had rage. I've always had rage most of my life. And that rage manifested itself over the years, and I've made a lot of amends in sobriety for my behavior.
Yeah.
You know, that's emotional immaturity. That's teenager stuff.
Amen. Yeah.
You know, like when you say to the kid, you know, why did you punch that guy in the face? Well, he said the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Well, you can't just hit people because they say the wrong thing, and they'll look at you like, why not? It seemed appropriate to me. You feel justified.
Yeah.
You're responsible for how I feel, and you're responsible for how I behave. Mm-hmm. The reason I'm angry is because you did something that caused me to be angry. Then I retaliated, of course, and you're responsible for that as well. If you hadn't have said that or done that, I wouldn't be angry. I wouldn't have retaliated. Yeah. So when you say that out loud, it sounds really bad, but that's the way we behave, isn't it?
So true, yeah, absolutely.
Some of us more than others, and that was me. That was, you know, and when I look back over the time I've been sober, I can see the phases that I've gone through of growing up. Yeah. You know? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. I yelled at my wife one time, just screaming. I yell at you. She's like 5'5". I'm 6'5". I outweigh her by 100 pounds, and I'm leaning, you know, screaming in her face like that. That guy. That's the guy I was. Yeah. And I told my sponsor what she said to me that caused me to do that. And he said, stop yelling at your wife. Yeah. And I had to explain it to him again because there's a reason why I yell at you. I have a good reason. And he just kept repeating, stop yelling at your wife. I remember leaving his house that day thinking, man, this is not therapy. The therapists are always interested in how I felt and what I thought about how I felt. He was only interested in my behavior. Yeah. What are you doing screaming at some woman like that? You know, we don't do that here. Yeah. You know? Yeah,
I've always had like
immature.
Yeah, that's true. Like I tell you, like one thing that helps me not do that is because like how I feel after something like that happens is always like gut wrenching for me. You know, it's like, wow, okay. Luckily, my relationship, you know, I just celebrated 8 years of sobriety, and my wife and me met in recovery, and you know, we got a pretty awesome relationship. Now that was not my experience before I came in here. You know, I was all the above. You know, and I tell you, like the relationship I had with my first sponsor is really what helped me start seeing a lot of these old ideas that I had that was, you know, shaping my reality. You know, and like it took a minute before we actually started getting into some of the step work in the book, right? And I was probably 16 months, you know, in sobriety before I did my first 4-step, right? But the relationship I had with that man was like, you know, like unbelievably amazing. Like the love that man gave me really changed my life, you know. And also at the time he was, you know, about 10 years sober, and he had, you know, he was just willing to answer the phone and share his life with me, you know. And I didn't understand that other people wasn't responsible for my actions until that relationship really started growing, you know. And you know, yeah, I'm really grateful for that relationship. And I think today it's I always try to, when I'm talking to a newer guy, I think it's extremely important that they stay pretty close to me, because my experience has shown, like if I'm not you know, staying close to, you know, if I wasn't staying close to my sponsor when all that stuff was going on, I'm thoroughly convinced that it is whatever old idea, you know. Was that your experience with it? What was your experience like?
Well, one of the things that happens is sometimes you'll hear in AA that we don't give advice or express opinions. I don't know who the hell made that up.
Yeah.
I don't know where that comes from.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And they say, well, we speak to our own experience, and that's very true.
Yeah.
Right? But I'm a newcomer in Alcoholics Anonymous. I need some good advice.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You know, I need somebody to help me. You know, I don't know what to do. I'm inexperienced. You know, I look like I'm grown up. You know, I don't need to be told what to do. I don't need to be talked down to. And like one of the first things that my sponsor said to me, and I'm 40 years later, I'm still repeating this. When after about a week or two of getting out of that recovery place, I asked this guy to sponsor me. Now, I've had the same sponsor for 39 years.
Wow.
I should have fired him several times, but he needs me now. You know? and I asked him to sponsor me, and one of the first things he said to me, was standing outside the Alano Club, is he said, no. One of the first things he said to me is, I want you to go home and read the doctor's opinion, and make notes in the margin of what you agree with and what you don't. Be at my house Thursday at 5 o'clock, and we'll discuss it. So for some reason, I did that. And I think what the bottom we hit, one definition of hitting bottom is the collapse of the alibi system. This whole thing where you're responsible for how I behave and stuff, that's the alibi, right? You can't be sober in AA and not know who they are, the people that put us here, you know?
Yeah.
My first inventory had the entire federal government and specifically the Department of Motor Vehicles. So,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Them, those bastards,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And I was always argumentative and stuff. And when he told me to go read that, I just did it. You know, I would just run out of argument. I just didn't have the energy for it. And I just did what he told me to do, this stranger. And I showed up at his house, and when we sat down, he didn't trust me that I'd read it, and he had me sit there and read it to him out loud, right? It was like going to class. Now, I thought everybody was doing this.
Yeah.
I didn't know. I thought that's what you do, right? One of the first things he said to me, that first sit down, I'm pretty sure it was the first time or second time, he said, my job as your sponsor is to guide you through the process of the 12 steps, that you might have some kind of spiritual awakening and maybe you'll never drink again for the rest of your life, because that happens here. Which was, it wasn't one day at a time, you know, I mean, he didn't say that.
Yeah.
He said, that happens here. This is my job, is to guide you through. He said, I would be happy to sit here and listen to you tell me what you think your problems are.
Yeah.
So that you will not share about them in the meetings.
Yeah.
The meetings are for recovery from alcoholism, not about how your day went.
Yeah.
Right? Now, I told him that down there at the Ilano Club, they are breaking that rule right and left. Should we go tell them, right?
Yeah, they need to know.
And he said, no, AA is a safe place. You can they really can't kick you out. You can do whatever you want, really.
Yeah.
He says, I'm just describing to you my Alcoholics Anonymous. The opinion. There's advice and there's opinion.
Yeah.
This guy was sober for 6 years. And I tell guys, boy, you're sober 6 years, you better have some opinions.
Yeah.
You know, like you hear people say, the longer I'm sober, the less I know. My immediate thought is, aren't they paying attention? Those people that don't know anything?
Yeah.
You know, I understand what they're saying. It's about humility. But really, I'm damn near 40 years sober. You should expect that I know some shit.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, I've got some good advice for you.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Really good advice.
Yeah.
An example. Some years ago, these young guys came in, and us old guys found ourselves sponsoring these guys that are teenagers. Because there was a wave of this shit that happened, you know? And this one guy's sitting on the couch right here in my office here. And he says to me, he's like 19 or 20 years old. And he says, you know, I really love my girlfriend, and we're getting along great. We have a great relationship, but this other girl is eyeballing me. You know, she's looking at me, and I'm looking back. I'm kind of intrigued. And he's asking me, you know, what do you think? What do you think I should do? And I told him, I said, well, if I were you, I wouldn't sleep with two women at the same time. That's going to come back and bite you. And he nods his head, and I turned away, and I said, you know how you find that out?
Yeah.
He goes, no, how? By sleeping with two women at the same time.
Amen. Yeah. So.
Now, there's some good advice with the acknowledgement of reality that probably he's not going to do what I tell him to do.
Yeah.
And if he doesn't do what I tell him to do, am I going to fire him? No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
I'll call him stupid and shit.
Yeah, that's so funny. Yeah.
But so I think the whole idea of this advice and stuff, that's what we do.
Yeah.
You know? And the beauty of AA really that makes it different from other places is I'm not telling you what to do. I'm telling you what happened to me, what I did, and what I learned from that experience.
Yeah. Yeah, it's forming a relationship. Different. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's about forming, you know, that's what this thing is. Like, it's really just relationships. You know, it's first time, you know, when I met my first sponsor, you know, he told me, you know, we were going to have we were talking about intimacy and how important it was to, like, we get honest with each other about certain stuff. And that took me a while, honestly. I had to, like, tiptoe around that idea. I'd feed him a little bit of information here and here and here because I just had a hard time trusting people at the time. And yeah, so let's talk a little bit about, so let's go into, you know, so what is I think it was the powerlessness. Is that the first pillar?
Well, specifically what happened when the pandemic hit. Now we're sitting here like you and I are sitting here now. Now we're looking at a computer all day long, you know, bitching about it. And, you know, everything got shut down.
Yeah.
And the last place that I went before the pandemic shut the world down was I flew up to Sonoma to speak at a men's banquet. And this guy picked me up. It was an older guy like my age, and he was my host, and he was driving me to the event. And he asked me how long I'd been sober. And I told him, and he said, well, I almost had 30 years. And he told me the story of being sober, married, met his wife in AA, they got married. He's coming up on retirement. Life's good. And he's not drifted completely away from AA, but he's resting on his laurels. He's just coasting, hanging out with his buddies, you know, and everything's fine. There's no problems. He's, you know. And he had a little surgery, and they gave him some pain medication. He took a couple extra pills, and pretty soon he's drinking again. Not an uncommon story. And it really got my attention because it was like listening to myself. I mean, this guy was my age. He was sober a long time. And at this point, he's telling me this story. He's 2 years sober again, and he's got a commitment. You know, he's driving the speaker around, and he's happy. He didn't lose his marriage, but it got pretty bad. You know, I mean, it's not good. When we start drinking, it's not good.
Yeah.
And that night I had dinner with him and we talked more about it, and when I came back to LA, it really had an effect on me. And I called my sponsor and I said, Jay, how come you and I are still around? And his answer was interesting. He has a tendency to give me interesting answers, and he said he didn't say it's because we work the steps so good or we're of service or we're good guys or whatever, it could be. We're members of the Hermosa Beach Men's Stag, the most badass AA meeting in the world, and what he said was, he says, Bill, you and I have never lost our enthusiasm for it.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
And I knew that was true. I've always been really enthusiastic about AA. I've had my ups and downs, but I've never lost that energy. I really enjoy it. And my sponsor instilled that in me. He's 44 years sober, and he's off in India right now doing some shit. I mean, he's an AA historian. He's got a movie coming out about Bill Wilson. It's like, this guy is he's a nutcase, and he's dragged me into all this stuff around the world, really. Mm. And we've never lost our enthusiasm for it. I'm still very enthusiastic about it. And I really thought about that, and I sat right here at the desk I'm sitting at talking to you. Mm. And I wrote some stuff down. I got quiet and I wrote some stuff down. And it says, in the 10th step, it says, the only thing that's going to save us, keep us sober, give us a life with some purpose, is the maintenance of our spiritual condition. So this is at the 10th step. So evidently they're figuring that we should have one of those. That we have by now, we've got a spiritual condition. Mm-hmm. I don't know about you, but when I was new in AA, I did not have one of those. Right? Yeah. So I got to thinking about that, and I said, well, if I'm new in Alcoholics Anonymous, I got shit all to maintain. So my job is to get one of those, right? Yeah. So that I can then maintain it. Yeah. It also says in that paragraph that we're going to rest on these things called laurels, like my friend up in Sonoma did, and that we shouldn't do that. And one of the definitions, if you look up laurel, like a laurel wreath that the Romans would wear, what that signified is a past achievement. It was a status symbol. I got to AA, I didn't have any past achievements, Yeah. I mean, some people went to college and shit. I couldn't even find the place. My college was the Oregon State Mental Institution up in Salem, Yeah. So I didn't have any past achievements. Yeah. I mean, some stuff happened to me. I did some things, but I wouldn't call them achievements, right? Yeah. So my job in AA, if I'm going to get this spiritual condition, I've got to generate some achievements, like actually do some stuff, so that later on I can rest on them and find out why that's not a good idea.
Yeah. Like how it feels. Yeah.
And I thought, I like the sound of that. I think this is the journey that we're on. So what's a spiritual condition made up of? Well, the first thing this guy wanted to know from me, this sponsor of mine, when I sat down with him in his living room and he had me read the doctor's opinion out loud, and the first questions he asked me, he says, do you believe that you're powerless over drugs and alcohol? I mean, that's what we ask them, don't we? Yeah. I mean, sometimes they'll hesitate. They're not sure about that. That's a good question to ask. Yeah. Are you sure? Do you believe you're powerless? Can you fix yourself? Yeah. Well, it was easy for me. I was very sick, and I knew that was an easy answer. I could say unequivocally, I'm powerless over this shit. I hope this works for me because I can't. I'm sick. I'm ill. I've almost killed myself. Well, 39 years later, the powerless thing has more meaning. I think it's everything.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm a self-reliance guy. I assert myself, and that doesn't seem to work well. I mean, this idea, okay, if you want to achieve something, you have to work for it. I understand that. Yeah. But can I control that situation? Can I make myself do things? What is it I have any power over at all? And on my spiritual search, getting into a lot of Eastern stuff, but just mystics in general, whether they're Christian mystics or Hindu, you read the books, you read Eckhart Tolle, you read, Anthony DeMello, and you read Thomas Merton, Baba Ram Das, all these people, I'm from the 60s, so
Yeah.
the old hippies attract me, and I read this stuff, and all of them talk about personal powerlessness, not just drugs and alcohol, everything. That we are not running the show. I think that's the first pillar of spiritual condition. And we all human beings struggle with that. We look out into nature and we determine that some stuff is good and some stuff is bad. That doesn't exist in nature. Things just are.
Yeah.
We apply the morality to it. That doesn't exist. It's an intellectual creation of what's good and what's bad.
Yeah.
It helps keep society together by having certain rules that way, but the fact is, things just are. And I have trouble with that, and I struggle. I think things should be different. You should be different, then I wouldn't yell at you. If you behave differently, but I'm powerless over you. I'm powerless over politics. I'm powerless, just all kinds of shit. I'm powerless. So that's the first pillar. You go into the second step and says, okay, we need a power greater than ourselves to restore me to sanity. Logical thought progression. If I'm powerless, now we have the argument about, is there one of those? Right?
Yeah.
Well, my experience in AA is that you experience God. When you get into the concepts of what it is, now you can argue about it. The ego wants to be correct. You wouldn't want to pick the wrong God. Boy, that would be a disaster.
Yeah.
So we struggle with this whole conceptual thing. And what an atheist does, like me, is he creates a God and then doesn't believe in it.
It's so true. I've been saying that for years. Yeah.
And then sponsors say shit like when you want to argue with your sponsor about the whole God thing, my sponsor said to me, I don't believe in the God you don't believe in either.
Yeah.
And that's confusing because I want to argue with you.
Yeah.
And there's no argument about it.
Yeah.
Either you're powerless or you're not. Right? I mean, bottom line. So the second step, some people will tell you that you have to believe in God to do AA. That's not true. That just isn't true. You will experience it, and then you can label it with whatever makes you feel comfortable.
Amen.
But I stay out of the concept business. I'm not interested in concepts. I'm interested in the experience.
Direct experience.
And believe me, I've experienced it. Now, what is it? Who cares?
Yeah.
It's like, I think. So the third step then comes along. The third step's interesting. It says that we're going to make a decision to turn our life and will over to clearly what already has it anyway. I think it's nice of them to lead us to believe that we actually have some say in the matter, right? Well, I've been withholding myself from the totality of all things long enough. I'm going to acquiesce now and allow you to take me. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Where's my trophy?
Yeah. Yeah.
And we have these long, windy discussions about the difference between my will and God's will. Once again, here's the separation. Subject, object. I don't believe that. I don't think there's a difference between my will and God's will. My little ego, the 2.5-year-old, loves the idea of us having a battle of wills with the power that drives the entire universe. I don't think that's an issue.
Yeah.
We create that so that we can argue about it.
Yeah. Ego.
And clearly what God's will is what's happening right now. And I have trouble with what's happening right now. I'm looking for an alternative, and there isn't one. That's the issue. That's the essence of the struggle that we have.
So it's starting to become aware of what's going on.
Over time, you start seeing the truth of this, right? I mean, there's the illusion that I'm the author of my life. I can look back and, I accomplished this and I accomplished. Okay. So now I'm going to apply this in my personal relationships and stuff, and it's not happening. It's not working for me.
Yeah.
Experience will teach you, if you're paying attention, if you're on a spiritual path. So the inventory comes along, right? And the end result of living a life with seeming power. What does that inventory look like? It's resentment, fears, and broken sexual relationships. That's what I bring to you.
Yeah.
Living this life on self-reliance, alcoholism, drug addiction, this is what I bring to you.
This is how it manifests, yeah. Absolutely.
This is it.
Yeah.
So I write it, and in the inventory, What we're looking for is my faults and mistakes, not theirs.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean they're innocent, but I'm responsible for how I behave. That's what we're looking for in that inventory. So the second pillar, this is a baby step, but it's a big one. I have to stop blaming other people and institutions for my problems. It's time for little Bill to grow up. High school is over. I have to own my emotional nature and my behavior.
Wow, yeah. Alabama. What'd you say?
If I'm powerless, I can't expect you to change in order for me to be okay. And I realize that that's the way I've been living my life. Things outside myself need to be different, and then I'll be okay. In and of myself, I'm not okay. And when you really realize that, that's a sad state of affairs.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the blaming part is ingrained in me. It's part of my personality. It isn't just a character defect. This is who I am.
Yeah.
I've got a whole story I've been telling for a long time.
Sure.
About the disaster that is my life and why it's like that.
Yeah, and then it can still shift, because then it's like you go into self-pity. It's, I can't believe I'm this, Yeah, absolutely.
So then the ninth step comes. And these people that I hate, that I've listed in my resentment list, you want me to go to these people and make amends as a mechanism for ridding myself of the resentment. And this makes no sense to me. Scares the shit out of me. I just want to move on now and forget the past. But AA doesn't do that. They say, no, we're going to go clean this up. This is when the transformation begins. This is when the story that we've been telling begins to change. Because we've given motivation to people that they more than likely did not have for doing the things they did that we're blaming them for. And what we learn in the ninth step is nothing was ever personal. And it sure seemed personal, didn't it?
Absolutely.
I've got some really good, well-oiled resentments that is part of who I am. If I let go of that, who am I then? Right? And in that amends process is when this transformation begins. And when those first three pillars come together, I'm powerless. I'm trying to grasp it. It's going to take a couple of decades to really get it, but I'm on the path. I got to stop the blaming, and if I surround myself with some relatively healthy people, they'll help me stop that. I mean, really healthy AA isn't going to sit around and listen to you blame people.
Yeah.
They're going to tell you, come on, Bill, get over it, move on,
Yeah, sure.
You can get some help with that, and I received a lot of help with that. And when you realize that nothing was ever personal, which changes the story, this is the collapse of the egoic structure of who I am. This is the devolvement, the falling apart of my personality. Because these are the basic things. I think I have power. It's your goddamn fault. And everything is personal.
Yeah.
That's a teenager.
Yeah. A little mind-made self.
Teenager.
Yeah.
That's the way teenagers are.
Yeah.
And so what happens, this is not necessarily a happy moment. And I can tell you that kind of self-awareness without humor is depression.
Yeah.
And sometimes the appropriate emotional response is depression. Like if I look at, you reach a point on any spiritual path, and certainly this one, where you reach a point where you stand there and you go, oh my God, it's me. It was never them. It's me. That's not a happy place. And AA does a really good job at helping us laugh at who we think we are.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And you hear in AA, we laugh at the tragedies and we cry at the successes. That's real.
Wow, yeah. Sure.
Like, I fucked up, and everybody goes, yeah.
Yeah, welcome home.
Glad you recognize that, my friend.
Yeah.
Finally.
Yeah.
Finally.
Yeah.
So the next thing, in 1 through 9 is about 10% of the program. It's Sober 101. It's not really the work. The inventory is a little bit of work. The amends is certainly some work, but it's not the real work in AA. This is just so that we can get ready for the real work. The real work is in 10, 11, and 12. It's 90% of the program. It's where we live. And it includes all the other steps, the continuing inventory process, prayer and meditation, work with others. That's Alcoholics Anonymous.
Yeah.
You know, that first year, we're newcomers. We're not doing that shit.
Yeah.
You know, they've got us like mopping the floor and stuff, you know. It's like we're clawing our way up the ladder, you know.
Yeah.
I'm almost 40 years sober. My job in my men's stag is I'm the chairman. I get there and set up the goddamn chairs. You know, they don't recognize how superior I am.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But in the meditation process, the 10th step is about making amends in the present moment, right? I find I'm beginning to get it now. Whenever I'm disturbed, it's me. I have to take responsibility for that. It's going to take a while for it to really sink in, but intellectually, I see it now. Nobody wants to listen to me complain about what anybody did to me. You know, I've been around a while now, right? Nobody wants to hear that. And I get it now. That doesn't fly. You know, they're not going to change. But in meditation, I can watch myself think, right? I mean, this is the key. This is an experience that is a life-changing experience. It changes the perception. Yeah. It's very simple, but it's very profound.
Amen.
I can focus on my breath and be right in that present moment. And the egoic mind, the thinking mind, doesn't like the present moment. There's nothing for it to do. So it wanders away. And I notice it has wandered away.
Yeah.
What notices? If I am that persona that's in my thinking mind, I wouldn't notice it. What is it within me that can actually watch it operate? At 20 years sober, this became real to me. I started getting really sick and I needed help. And I started meditating with real intent rather than just playing with it. I need some help because I can't change my physical condition. And this could kill me. I need help. When it wanders away, you notice it has wandered away, and then you gently bring it back to the breath. Yeah. Evidently, I don't have to go where this wants to take me. Evidently. If I can see it, that there's a consciousness within me that can watch that one operate. And in AA, we talk about it like that. We say, my head is out to get me. Yeah. We talk about it in the third person. But we make it adversarial because that's who we are.
Yeah, Bob B.
But it's not out to get me. It needs me for transportation. Yeah. It's part of me. It's not an enemy. It just does what it does.
Needs something to sink its teeth in.
It in the future, right?
Yeah.
So now that I'm meditating and I really am having this experience, I'm developing the watcher within me. It's taking a larger voice on the committee. It now is being acknowledged, and that it's a real thing. This isn't just airy-fairy bullshit spiritual stuff.
It's a direct experience.
This is real.
Absolutely.
Right? And it's part of the human condition of every human being. Right? That self-awareness is the fourth pillar. When I realize that I'm the problem, and then I realize that the thinking mind, there's a separation here between it and the essence of my being. Some people call it the soul, you know, the God within. You know, that whole idea that, you know, I used to hear people talk about, I still do, talk about having a personal relationship with a power greater than yourself. And I would ask them, what is that? I don't sense that, right? And it doesn't lend itself to words, and sometimes people are just repeating something that they've heard. It seems to me that the ego wants to have its own personal relationship with God, you know, preferably one that's better than yours. Yeah. And you can see that all over the world, you know, religious wars and all this stuff, right? What if the truth is, or more of a closer to the truth, is all there is God? There is nothing else but that. There is no separation. There's no way that I have to be in order for God to come to me. And in AA, we know that God comes to us in our brokenness. And usually it's because we get forced to our knees. You know, we get beat up bad enough that finally the mind opens up a little bit. What if all there is God? And the spiritual program of Alcoholics Anonymous is a program of subtraction that subtracts everything that's within us, that's stopping us from seeing that we already have everything we need. The Hindus say, what you're looking for, you're looking with. Yeah. They say stuff. The Eastern guys have been saying this for fucking centuries. You know,
consciousness. Yeah.
That there's no separation. This idea of separation
Yeah.
is the fallacy. It's the illusion.
And it shows how
That we're all
vital.
connected.
It shows how vital the awareness is. Like once that awareness starts coming in there, you start seeing how like, holy crap, there's actually something else here. If you look at, in the big book, it talks about this is a part of my makeup. It's obscured by pomp, by calamity, by worship of other things,
Deep down inside of every human being is the idea of God.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think that's probably true.
Yeah.
But we suppress it. The ego suppresses it.
Mm-hmm.
So, self-awareness is a key thing. This is where the work really is. It's not just prayer and meditation, but the whole idea of practicing the principles in all our affairs. And the final pillar, the fifth one, is a big one. It's the part of us that's missing that we don't know is not there. Like I can see the character defects. I'm loud, I'm arrogant, I'm pompous, but I'm not stupid. I can see that's not good shit, but it's hard to change, but I can see that. What about stuff that never developed in me that I don't know isn't there because I never grew up and I didn't develop something? That's compassion, empathy. That's what I lack. Every self-centered person lacks empathy. They're so focused on themselves that they really don't feel others. This is the conversation about intimacy.
Yeah.
We mistake sex for intimacy, and it's not. It can be the celebration of intimacy in a relationship. That's certainly true. But it's not, in and of itself, it's just a fun thing we get to do. It's not intimacy.
Yeah.
Intimacy is something else. Intimacy is being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes, to be connected, to feel that connection. And the mechanism that's used in AA to bring about this compassion, this kind of intimacy, is sponsorship. When I let you in my life, it disrupts everything, right? Like the most spiritual thing you'll hear in AA is get in the car. Yeah. Well, who else is going? I don't want to go with any lame people. We're all lame, Bill. Just get in the car. What's on your social calendar? Get in the car.
Yeah.
When somebody asks you for help, you never say no. Like never say no to an AA request. This is a mechanism to get us out of our comfort zone. Because that's when change occurs. I'm going to have new experiences. Uncomfortable experiences, I will turn them down because I don't want to be uncomfortable, right? I don't want to go down into Watts to bring a panel to where those people live, that kind of thing. I feel uncomfortable, right? But you go, and then you find out who those people really are. Whatever prejudice you have will walk across the room and ask you for help. And if you want to hang on to the prejudice, send it away. So this guy says, this years ago, I hope I never forget this, walked across the room after our men's stag, and he said, I really like what you have to say, and I really need some help. I need a sponsor. Will you sponsor me? But I think I should tell you that I'm gay. And I said to him, wouldn't you rather have a gay sponsor? His response was unforgettable. He goes, no, he says, I've got the gay thing down pretty good. But alcoholism is kicking my ass. And I remember when he said that to me, I stood there and said internally, I will never forget this.
Yeah. Wow.
40 years later, I'm still telling that story. That's a true story. And so it has brought me with people and places, parts of the world that I would never, in and of myself, ever go to. And it changed my life. And the first 10 years I was doing that stuff, I was trying to make a name for myself in an anonymous organization. But what happened, it didn't matter what my motivation was, because what happened is I fell in love with you. Then my motivation changed, unbeknownst to me, without my permission.
Wow.
Somewhere in that process, I just simply wanted to help you. And I never lost my enthusiasm. That's the enthusiasm. The enthusiasm isn't about going to meetings or the energy at conferences, although that does exist. Sandy Beach used to say, if you've been awakened, you can't not do this work. And what he's talking about is working with others. That is the heart and soul of Alcoholics Anonymous. Just what my sponsor did with me when he invited this stranger I was into his living room. And I've been doing that all this time. That's what I do.
Wow.
That's what AA is to me. That nothing will change you more than that. There's a lot of people out there that are doing inventory after inventory after inventory. aren't you bored with yourself?
Yeah.
I mean, that's just another form of self-obsession. Have I done many inventories? Yes, of course I have. But it's not about that. When two people come together, not just one is helped. But those are the pillars. I mean, that's to me, when I sat and wrote that stuff down and started expressing, I thought, this is my experience. This is what has happened, And I believe it. But it's all 12 steps, It's like, it's nothing. It's just another way of verbalizing it.
Yeah.
This transformation that happens to us.
Yeah, that's the good stuff. Well, like that's my my experience is pretty much identical. I like how you laid it out right there. I started seeing, it was, for me, I started getting into meditation about 3 or 4 months in with intent. I'd started branching out. My grand sponsor used to talk about how vital it was for us to have some kind of spiritual experience. And, I just went on a path, and I got into power now and a lot of Buddhist teachings. I studied a lot of and did a lot of Buddhist meditation practices for years. And when I tell you, man, before I even got finished, even halfway finished with the steps, I'd started having some pretty profound experiences with the Watcher, and but another thing that happened though is I didn't have like anything to deal with resentment and stuff like that. So it'd be funny. It was funny because I'd be in the present moment and I'd be pissed off at whoever, And so let's talk a little bit about what does your daily disciplines look like? Like, what does that look like for you as far as like morning practices?
When I talked about being 20 years sober, because before then, I was going and sitting with people and meditating and chanting and doing that. We were just having fun with it, just the energy of being around that. But when I started getting really sick, it became more than just a pastime. Now, prior to that, I've never been a very disciplined person. And you hear people talk about getting up a half hour early and finding a spot somewhere and doing that discipline. I'd do that 3 or 4 days in a row, and then once I missed a day, I'd quit.
Yeah.
Then I'd come back to it. So it wasn't like I wasn't doing anything, but I never was very disciplined at it. So at 20 years sober, I had an experience in a retreat, and I was on interferon and shit, and I was pretty sick, and that's when I read Power of Now. And he was a new voice at the time. This was a while ago. He was a new non-dual Advaita kind of voice, that was different. And he was new on the scene, and I read it. And he tells a story in the preface of that book about being a geek in Vancouver, Canada. He's this nerdy little geek, which is who he is. And he was having panic attacks and all this stuff. And he woke up in the middle of the night one night, walked out in his living room and raised his hands to the ceiling in the middle of a panic attack. And he said, he cried out, "I can't live with myself any longer." And the very next thought was, well, if I can't live with myself, there must be two of me. I wonder which one is real. And I read that and I went, no shit.
Yeah.
Isn't that the truth? There's the person I think I should be, and then there's the person I am. Right? And in order to cover up who I really am, I create a persona, which is the way that I want to be perceived. It isn't necessarily true. But it's my persona. And one of the big jokes at the Hermosa Beach Men's Stag is, I'm Bill C, God damn it. That's a joke. Very important that remain a joke.
Yeah.
Because Bill C is a persona.
Yeah.
The real me could be something very different. Maybe not too different, but something different. It's more real.
Yeah.
So I gave myself permission not to be disciplined. To just do it every day. Not at a certain time, not a certain amount of time, just every day. And I've done that for a long time. And meditation now has taken on different terms. It's more about being mindful. one of the things that happens is like, I live in a city. It's a suburb, so it's nice here. It's a nice neighborhood. But I'll be sitting out in the backyard meditating, and somebody will crank up a leaf blower, or a car will drive down the street. Mm-hmm. Now, there's two ways that you can look at that. It's a disturbance. We need to have a law to shut off all the fucking leaf blowers in the city,
Yeah.
Because they're disturbing my meditation.
Yeah.
Or you can realize that whatever that sound is in the same space you're in.
Amen.
There is no separation unless you create one. Right? So, if I'm meditating and my phone rings, evidently the meditation is over. Because if it wasn't over, the phone wouldn't have rang. Because I'm not running the show. The phone is an indicator of somebody coming into my life. Now, we're all attached to our phones. God knows I communicate with people on 15 different levels.
Yeah.
There's WhatsApp, there's, Facebook messages, all this stuff. So I'm hooked on my phone like people are. And if I'm not hooked on it, I'm playing puzzles on it or something.
Yeah.
But it's part of my life. And one of the things I used to say for years that I still believe in is answer the phone. You want to change your life? Answer the phone. And we can screen the calls. We can see who it is. Don't do that. Just answer the phone. If they weren't supposed to be in your life, they wouldn't have called.
Yeah.
That's
good stuff.
Now, spam risk, I don't answer spam risk when it says that. But the point is, quit trying to control things.
Yeah.
I can't control my meditation. If I'm meditating and it's going on for 3 or 4 minutes and the phone rings, I answer the phone.
Yeah.
Sometimes it'll go for 10, 15, 20 minutes, maybe a half an hour, 45 minutes. It's been a while since I've meditated for 45 minutes. I used to do that a lot.
Same.
But sometimes meditation just happens.
Yeah.
I don't have to create a space for it.
Yeah.
The other thing is being mindful. Like, whatever you're doing, try to be mindful about what you're doing. Don't be mindless. Be mindful.
Yeah.
That's a meditation.
Absolutely.
Being present. Being actually present.
Yeah.
Like when I'm talking to somebody on the phone, am I playing a puzzle on the computer or am I really listening to what they're saying to me?
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm playing a puzzle on the computer.
Yeah, both, yeah.
Sometimes the answer is Bill's like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
If I catch myself, I'll stop and listen.
Yeah.
Somebody's trying to communicate with me.
Well, it's funny because the ego, it'll turn whatever into whatever. I've heard Ram Dass talk about, you hear, or at least around here, you'll hear talking about in the rooms, you hear people say, go do something nice for somebody without telling anybody. It's like, I got this ego, this mind-made self that'll like go do something like that and then make myself feel better. And I won't tell anybody about it, but internally, I'm feeling way better, And
I figure if other people don't hear about it, it didn't really happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's a lot. It's funny because that's been my experience too, as far as like in the morning. I don't always do it in the morning. I sometimes I prefer and I like being mindful throughout the day. I'll be honest with you though. So in the beginning, the first 2 or 3 years I got into meditation, some kind of shift happened inside of me where it was like mindfulness is just like automatically like a working part of my day, and it's, talking to certain people or listening to certain literature, I listen to audiobooks all the time. I'm always listening to some kind of audiobook or whatever. I got a job where I'm able to do that. And, or working with guys, sharing that with guys, like talking about the Watcher and about how, the mind-made self and, just even if it's something as middle as like, I got certain guys that they'll call me and they're in their head about whatever it is. And some of them I can just cut through it like that by just talking about mindfulness, and it just talking mindfulness can just cut through the mind, how are we sitting? What's our feet feel like on the floor? What's the temperature in the room?
Well, one thing that happens to me that's been really cool is that, talking around a lot and people will come up to me afterwards and they go, Eckhart Tolle? Are you a Buddhist? They like that. Yeah. And you have these wonderful conversations, because there's people hear that.
Yeah.
And it's maybe a bit of a different way to talk about the steps, this kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And you get to hear what other people are doing. They come up to you, they talk about, this is what I'm reading this. Have you read this one? It's like, pretty soon there's books mailing around and people are,
yeah.
and it's cool. I mean, I enjoy that conversation about
Sure,
it,
sure.
Talking about God or that spiritual world is probably the greatest topic that there is.
Amen.
Because, like Ram Dass says, if you're listening to somebody talk about God, be sure they're laughing. If they're not laughing, leave.
Yeah. It's so true.
And I concur with that. Some of the people that I'm most intrigued by, there is humor there. Because nobody knows for sure what the gurus are doing is they know that you have to have your own experience. So they're trying to help you have your own experience. And what we go to them for is we want answers. And they don't have answers. That's why they're so frustrating. They answer questions with questions.
Yeah.
Very frustrating.
Yeah.
AA is very much the same way. And I'm sponsoring you. I know you have to have your own experience.
Yeah.
If I can guide you through the steps like my sponsor did with me, you're going to have your own experience.
Yeah.
There's somebody out there that's waiting to hear your voice, not mine. That's how it operates.
So true. Yeah. What you brought up, it's funny, that was the next question I was going to ask was some of the books. Like, what are your some of your daily readings that you enjoy? Some of your favorites?
Well, the books that I recommend to people, if they haven't read it, Power of Now and The New Earth is
phenomenal.
I think, very good. Anthony DeMello, Awakening, like DeMello says, you don't want to wake up, you just want relief. And his books are really good. But there's a lot of people out there. There's a lot of really good stuff out there. We have a Tuesday night meeting where we read spiritual books Tuesday night. And one of the books that I've got here is written by a friend of mine, probably my best friend in the world. You won't believe his last name. It's Wayne Lickerman, spelled just like that. And he's been awakened, and he's got this Powerlessness, Advaita, and the 12 Steps of Recovery. And it's a really good book, and it's a different way of looking at it. Very simple but clear.
Yeah.
I recommend that book. I've sat with Ram Dass. He's passed away now. Got to hug him and kiss him. I have a signed copy of Be Here Now, which is, if anybody knows about him, you're jealous now.
Yeah. He's one of my favorites.
He was around at the time when I got sober, and he was one of the voices I could hear. Because he's an old hippie. He's the old LSD guy, right?
Yeah.
And one guy asked him in a meeting, we were sitting with him one time, the guy says, "Do you still do LSD?" And he says, "Well, every once in a while I go out in the desert and check in." But he was great, and all his books are just great. I mean, it's Osho is good, Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, and that whole story, it's the messenger. It's the message, not the messenger.
Yeah.
But some of the stuff was very intriguing. There's lots of good stuff out there.
Yeah. Yeah, The Way of Powerlessness. What is it? Steve L. Good buddy with yours, I believe. Steve was at a men's retreat I was at just a couple months back in Nashville, and he spoke about that book quite a bit. Yeah, it's one on the list to get. Yeah. Well, this has been wonderful. Yeah, thanks, Bill. It's been awesome. Man.
Just quickly, what I do every day. You asked me what's my daily routine.
Yeah.
I send out daily quotes. You get them, I think.
Yeah.
So people send me lots of stuff. What I do is I sit up in bed in the morning with my wife generally, and I read my email, and people send me spiritual stuff. My friend Steve Lamb sends out a thing, and I read that every morning. I don't necessarily pray and meditate first thing in the morning.
Yeah.
But I think it's really good advice to give somebody. I just don't do it.
Yeah. Same.
It isn't, my day doesn't look like that,
Yeah.
But during the course of the day, I will do some of that. And I started some time back praying out loud, trying to have as much sincerity as I can to be relieved of the bondage of self. But the thing I do every day is I talk to people.
Same.
People call me, and I call people. I'm retired now, so I do AA all day, every day.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
There's several Zoom meetings that we started that we kept on Zoom because people are from out of town. We do have an AA history thing that we do on Wednesday nights, which is fascinating.
Nice.
So I read a lot of that kind of stuff. We have spiritual book study that we do on Tuesday nights. I have my men's seg. So I do AA. My wife is sober 34 years. She sponsors lots of women, so there's people here all the time. To me, that's a life in recovery. That's a spiritual life.
Sure.
Faith without works is dead.
Absolutely.
And I think the works is more important than the faith.
There you go. Yeah.
If you do enough works, you'll get some faith. Matter of fact, you'll believe in it. You won't have faith in it because you'll see it happen.
Yeah.
One of the things I like to say to people is that you and I are in an organization where people's lives are saved every day.
Amen.
Every day, people's lives are saved here, even in Nashville. Den of iniquity. And the mechanism that's used for that life-saving process is us. It's you and me. We say the words. We drive the cars. We go get them. We introduce them to our friends. It's us.
Yeah, he flows through us.
So I think the essence of the spiritual path that you and I are on is that. It's actually being there for others, getting out of self. And AA does a really good job of that. If you really, that's what they were doing before there was a book, before there were steps. That's all they were doing.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening with us now. So that's a spiritual life. I believe that I lead a very spiritual life, and I don't think that's bragging.
Yeah.
That's what I see it as, right?
Same, yeah.
And I make mistakes, I fuck up, and I have to make amends. But I'll tell you, later in life, 40 years sober, there's a lot less of that.
Yeah. Thank God, right? Thank God that it happens, to be honest with you.
Well, if you want to find out how spiritual I really am, talk to my wife.
Yeah. That's funny, yeah. That's awesome, Bill. I really appreciate you joining us today.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed this very much.
And we should do this again sometime. Maybe something soon over this next maybe 6 months or so. Have you back on the show and
sure.
Yeah. Well, buddy, I appreciate you and have a good night.
You too.
Hello. Thank you for listening to 3 Legacies Recovery Recordings. If you enjoy our program, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to share with a friend. We're also self-supporting, so feel free to contribute to the channel through Venmo at Recovery Recordings 615. Please note that the views expressed on this podcast are solely our individual views and do not represent any official stance of any 12-step program. We are not affiliated with any specific recovery organization, and this content should not be considered as professional advice for alcoholism or addiction.